Hi! In this video we're going to be looking at the A1 piece from grade 1. It's the Allegretto in C. And here we have a composer from Austria who wrote a lot of music himself and also published music by other composers. And lots of people have enjoyed playing this Allegretto in C for many years. So if you're learning it for the first time, you'll be following generations of people who've been playing this piece. So that's a wonderful thing. Now, this piece of music is in something we call ternary form, which means it's got three sections, and we can call the first section A and the second section B, and then because the first section comes back again later in the piece, we'll call that A. So A, B, A. Three sections, the first section, a kind of contrasting middle section, and then the first section coming back again at the end. And when the first section comes back at the end, it's the same music, but it's presented in a slightly different way. Because at the beginning, it's all kind of in chords, especially if you look at the left hand, you'll see all these chords with a melody in the right hand. But then if you just have a look down to bar 17, you'll see that the right hand melody is the same, but the left hand is now different. So the right hand is still doing this melody that we've just heard, whereas the left hand at the beginning was doing these chords, and now when we come to bar 17 it's breaking them up. And that left hand pattern has got a special name. It's called an Alberti bass. So a guy called Alberti decided to take chords and break them up by going from the kind of three notes of the chords: bottom, top, middle, top, bottom, top, middle, top. And when you see that, that's an Alberti bass. So this piece is in ternary form. It goes A, B, A. And when the A section comes back at the end, we've got Alberti bass going on in the left hand. So this is just demonstrating how this piece actually works. Now, it's a funny thing because really this piece should be played with repeats. So you should play from 1 to 8 and then repeat that, and then move on into bar 9, play to the end, and then repeat the second section. In the exams, we don't do repeats, so we just play straight through the piece. So if you were doing it with the repeats, actually it would feel as if the whole piece has really got two sections. So a first section from bar 1 to 8, and then a second section from 9 to the end. And we'd kind of call that something else. We'd call it binary form because it's got a first section and then it's got a second section. But because that first bit comes back at the end, if you are doing the repeats, then what we would do is to call that a rounded binary form. So you've got two sections, but then in the second section it's much longer because you have the contrasting thing, and then the first section comes back at the end. But if you're doing it without the repeats, then it goes A, B, A, and effectively it works as what we call a ternary form. So a lot of this information will be perhaps more useful to the teachers than those playing the piece, but if you're playing the piece, I think it's quite useful to know what Mr. Diabelli was thinking when he wrote the piece. So that's how it's structured. Now, inside that structure, music is organized into phrases. And it's always useful to think, well, how long are these phrases and where do they come? So let's have a little look at that next. Because we start off with a 2-bar phrase. So the first phrase, and if you're unsure about what a phrase is a musical sentence. So here's your first phrase, the first 2 bars. Okay, that's the first phrase. Here's the second phrase, and that's also 2 bars. And you can kind of hear that the first phrase is a kind of musical question, and the second phrase is a sort of musical answer, isn't it? And then after those two 2-bar phrases, we have one longer phrase that's 4 bars. So you see how that A section works? You've got a 2-bar phrase, a 2-bar phrase, and then a 4-bar phrase. Okay, let's look at the next section, the contrasting B section. We've got 2-bar phrases again. So here's a 2-bar phrase. Here's another 2-bar phrase. And you can kind of hear that they kind of feel pretty similar as well. They've got the same rhythm, they've got the same phrasing, they've got the same kind of repeated notes and so on. So they're very similar, aren't they? And then in bar 13, we have a 4-bar phrase. And even there, you can see that bars 13 and 14 are the same as bars 9 and 10. So he kind of revisits 9 and 10 and then carries on into a 4-bar phrase. And then when we get to the next bit in bar 17, well, we've got a 2-bar phrase, a 2-bar phrase, and then a 4-bar phrase. So there's your 2-bar phrase. There's your next 2-bar phrase. And there's your 4-bar phrase. So now you can see how this whole piece works. Now, why is it useful to know about phrases? Well, it's useful to know what a composer was doing when he or she was writing the piece, so you can see how it goes. But it's also very useful when we play the piece because we want to be able to play in phrases. Lots of people might well play this piece, whether they're playing in the exam or not, and they'll just play one note after the other with no sense of phrase at all. But if you can kind of feel where the phrases end, you can kind of take a little musical breath, can't you? So that first phrase, take a breath, take a breath, and then go through the 4 bars, take a breath, 2 bars, take a breath, 2 bars, take a breath, and then go through the 4 bars, and then breath, and then we go 2 bars, breath, 2 bars, breath, and then 4 bars to take us to the end. And you can also feel that we get these short phrases, these 2-bar phrases, and then when the 4-bar phrase comes, because it's so much longer, you can really enjoy the length of the phrase. So I think understanding what we call the structure of the piece, how it's put together, kind of helps us to make sense of what's going on musically. When we're learning a piece, we tend to focus on learning the notes, learning the rhythms, doing the fingering, all that kind of stuff. And then maybe we put some expression in later. But if we can feel how the phrases work, well, that's really useful and we can understand how the whole piece is put together. Okay, now then, when you're playing this piece, it's a good idea to bear in mind that the melody, the main tune, is in the right hand. And you've probably heard that already because we've already heard this tune, haven't we? So that's our main tune. Now the left hand is just playing chords, isn't it? I say just playing chords. It's an important part of the music, isn't it? Because this is the accompanying stuff that's going on underneath. But when you play this piece, we have to be very careful that whatever the volume is, what we call the dynamic, that we can hear the melody above those chords in the left hand. I've heard lots of people play this piece with the left hand too loud. Now I think it's partly because there's only one note in the right hand, but sometimes you've got 3 notes in the left hand. So the left hand can be a bit heavy. So if you're not careful, you get this. Can you hear what's happening there? Those left-hand chords are kind of swamping the sound and we can hardly hear that poor melody in the right hand. Now, if you think of it the other way around and think, I really want to hear that melody in the right hand and I just want those left-hand chords to be a bit more in the background, sounds totally different. So I'm playing the same notes, but it just sounds so different, doesn't it? And this is what we call balance between one hand and the other. Which hand's got the tune? Which hand's got the most important thing? So how can we make sure that even if it's quiet or if it's loud, that we get that melody to be a little bit louder and the accompaniment to be a little bit quieter if we can manage that. It's quite difficult to do, but well worth doing. And honestly, the best way of doing it is to use these ears and just listen to it and think, I just want to be able to hear that melody, and then that will be absolutely lovely. Okay, now the other thing is you might hear when you play this piece is sometimes the music is a bit kind of tense and sometimes it kind of relaxes. So let's have a think about how we think that works. If we look at the first 2-bar phrase, well, we start off with this chord, which is a kind of, if you like, a fairly neutral thing. But the next chord suddenly feels more intense, doesn't it? Could you feel that one feels much more intense? And then when you go to this note, you go, it kind of relaxes. So we get kind of neutral, then it goes a bit intense, and then it relaxes. And then it does the same in the next phrase. So we're kind of neutral, and then we have a bit of tension, and then it relaxes. Now, you might say that thing in the second phrase in bar 4, where the right hand plays a C sharp, is even more intense than that bit in bar 2 where the right hand plays a C. And for those who want to know what that thing's called, that C sharp in bar 4, because C sharp's not in the key of C major. You know, when you play your scale of C major, which this piece is supposed to be an allegretto in C, means allegretto in C major. When you play the scale of C major, you don't play C sharp, do you? So this is a kind of funny note. It doesn't belong to the key, and it's what we call a chromatic note. So these things we've got with these tense notes in bar 2 and bar 4, they're called appoggiaturas. It's when we're leaning on a note and then relaxing, leaning on a note and then relaxing. And the reason why bar 4 has an appoggiatura that's even more intense than in bar 2 is because it uses that C sharp, and it's called a chromatic appoggiatura. So goodness, so you can feel these phrases kind of neutral, tense, release, neutral, more intense, release. Now, can you see what this means for how we might play it? Because it says P at the beginning, so quiet, that's good. But you have these little diminuendos in bar 2 and bar 4. Well, I think what that really means is that when you come to bar 2, you make the first note a little bit louder so you can kind of shade off into the second note. And when you come to bar 4, you do exactly the same thing, but because in bar 4 it's a chromatic appoggiatura, you might lean on the first note even more and then relax. And then the next phrase, this 4-bar phrase, is a bit more neutral. You know, it doesn't have all these appoggiaturas and chromatic appoggiaturas. So you see that's quite graceful and quite delicate, which is the kind of music that Diabelli was writing. So it's quite interesting when you're getting to know a piece of music to think, where are the places where it's kind of neutral? You know, it's not relaxing, it's not being kind of intense. And where are the places where you think, oh, that's a bit more musical tension, or, oh, that's a moment when it relaxes. So we can kind of begin to feel that. When we get to bar 9, after the repeat sign, where this middle section begins, the B section, we can still feel a little bit of this happening. It's kind of neutral, and then it's a little more intense, and then it relaxes. Then it's neutral, a bit more intense, and then it relaxes. Do you see how that works? And then in 13 and onwards, it does the same thing, because we said bars 13 and 14 is the same as bars 9 and 10. And then it's fairly kind of relaxed there as well. But you just notice in bar 15, there's an F sharp there. And actually what Diabelli is doing here, something a little bit sneaky, is called a modulation. That's when we change key. So it's allegretto in C and C major. But when we get to this point, so just to remind you, this is now bar 15 and 16, we're going to G major. When you play your scale of G major, you put an F sharp in it, don't you? So you see there's an F sharp in bar 15, and then it takes us on to a chord of G. So we're modulating, we're changing key to G major. So there's just a little bit of something to paint when you play that. Can you feel the modulation from bar 13? Oh, we've gone somewhere else. And then we come back home again to C. And then we've got the Alberti bass going in the left hand. And I think this is one reason why we've got this MF marking when we get to bar 17, because it's kind of saying, oh, yippee, we're going back to the tune that we had at the beginning. But because we've got the Alberti bass now, it sounds a bit more kind of a celebration, doesn't it? You know, at the beginning it was a little bit kind of reserved. But now we're getting to this bit in bar 17. It's kind of like we're nearly at the end and we're feeling a bit more jolly about it all. So we're still doing the tension and release, but that left hand is kind of bubbling along with all those quavers. So that's kind of what's going on in the music. So, okay, you want to think about things like it's P at the beginning and it's MP in bar 9. So can we kind of establish what our P level is and then have our MP level a little bit higher, moderately quiet. And then we've got MF, moderately loud in bar 17. So 3 different levels for the piece. So if you can sort of think, well, you know, we're starting P here on level 1 and then we're going up to level 2 for MP, then we're going up to level 3 for MF. And then in between, we're going to be thinking about all those things that I've just described that help you to feel the phrases, and where the music wants to breathe at the ends of the phrases, and when we get those moments where it's a bit neutral and moments where it's a bit more intense, moments when it's a bit more relaxed, and that'll be really good. So just a couple of other things for teachers that you might want to know. We've talked about the chromatic appoggiatura in bar 4. It's also interesting in the B section between bars 9 and 16 that there is a pedal point in the left hand. Now you all might like to have a look at this in bar 9. Can you see the bottom note of the left hand goes G, 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 G. Goodness me, that's a lot of G's, isn't it, that the composer wrote there? And when you have a note that's repeated for a long time, or even if it's just held on for a long time, we call it a pedal point or a pedal note. And that's what's happening in the middle section of this piece. In that B section, we have this pedal point. Now, we call it a dominant pedal point. Oh, that sounds a bit complicated. Dominant just means the 5th note. So if this is allegretto in C, what's the 5th note of the scale of C? C, D, E, F, G. So that's what this is. It's the 5th note, which is called the dominant. So it's a dominant pedal point. What does a dominant pedal point do? It kind of builds up a little bit of tension because it's kind of screaming to go back to the 1st note of the scale, what we call the tonic, which is C. So all the way through that middle section, you can kind of feel that all the things that we've been talking about go on, but we're kind of waiting for that G to go back to C. So you hear that G in the bass, G, 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 G. We're screaming to go to C. So when it finally happens in bar 17, we kind of breathe a sigh of relief because we've gone to C. We think, oh, great, my dominant pedal point is what we've called resolved. It's gone back to C. And that adds to the celebration that we can have in bar 17 when we come back to repeat the A section with that Alberti bass in the left hand. So that's a useful thing to know about. Okay, one other quick thing for teachers, just in case you want to know what's going on with the chords. Now, if you're learning this piece, you might be into chords, but if you're not into chords, don't worry too much about this, but I'll go through it fairly quickly. So bar 1 is chord 1, bar 2, 5, 7, C, bar 3 is 1, bar 4 is 5, 7, B with a chromatic appoggiatura, then it's chord 1 in the next bar, 2B, chord 2 in 1st inversion in bar 6, then 1C at the beginning of bar 7, that's chord 1 in 2nd inversion, then 5 on the 2nd beat, 1 at the beginning of bar 8. So we've got 1 chord per bar up to bar 6. Then in bar 7 and 8, suddenly we go a little bit faster with the chord changes, what we call the harmonic rhythm. That's because we're coming to a cadence, the end of a section there, and we quite often have faster chord change or faster harmonic rhythm when we come to a cadence. So that's what's happening there. Then in the B section, in bar 9, we chord 5, bar 10 is called 1C, 1 in 2nd inversion. Then we do the same thing again. In the next 2 bars, we go chord 5, back to 1C. Then in 13, we go to chord 5. Then in 14, back to 1C. So do you see how that's going? 5, 1C, 5, 1C, 5, 1C. It's the same pair of chords running through there. And then in 15 and 16, we go chord 5, 7 to chord 1 in G major in this dominant key. And then we come back to C major and do that entirely as before. Okay, well, I think in terms of notes, you'll probably be quite happy working through those, getting all your fingering sorted out, making sure the phrasing is happy. And then these are kind of a lot of musical things that I've tried to point out that should help you play Diabelli's beautiful Allegretto in C. And then if you can really feel what the mood of this piece is about with all the things that we've talked about, that will really help you to give a lovely performance of the piece. So enjoy learning the wonderful Allegretto in C.